Every game has some degree of difficulty, be it a first-person art game or a ruthless roguelike RPG. Yet any qualitative measurement of difficulty is inherently subjective, and assessments can vary greatly from one player to the next. The terms easy, normal, and hard, while nearly ubiquitous, are essentially meaningless outside the context of any specific game or genre. But when we look at action-based games, such as the acclaimed Souls series, which stands out for its notorious difficulty and lack of hand-holding, the question arises, what about dying repeatedly to various enemies is so appealing? Before we can identify how games employ challenges that engage the player, it's important to first produce a working definition of difficulty. In its simplest form, if we consider the goal to be the objective of a given game and the input to be the player's means to further themselves towards this goal, then difficulty is the intangible sum of obstacles, resource constraints, and AI that inhibit the player's progression and require an adaptation in input. A difficulty well executed, then, is properly balanced against player input so as to be as compelling as possible. Resource constraints as an aspect of difficulty debuted in arcades as limited lives and timers. While still present in some genres, time constraints and one-ups in their traditional style have largely been retired by most modern titles. Instead, many unique mechanics are employed to deliver these same constraints in slightly more engaging manners, such as health potions in action RPGs or day and night cycles in survival games. Physical obstacles in the game's world are common to nearly any game that allows the player character to move on more than one axis. Obstacles are largely employed as a basis for the greater challenge presented by the AI, such as cover in military shooters or lengthy dungeons in RPGs. Yet, physical constraints can also become the primary source of difficulty as part of the core gameplay, as exemplified in action puzzlers such as the Portal series. Artificial intelligence is the means to provide challenge which we most associate with difficulty today, as most non-multiplayer games pit the player against the computer, if not solely against the environment. AI is also often the most complex and difficult element to implement in a game's development. What is often considered to be good AI is a computer suffering a number of conditional hindrances to bring it down to a level of skill that can be matched by the player. It is comparatively easy to program a contextually perfect AI that parries every blow, makes every bullet count, and otherwise trumps human reaction times in every scenario. Yet, an opponent that is perfect in every way lacks one very important aspect: fun. Artificial intelligence is an area of scientific study that has progressed significantly in the last 2 decades, yet its utilization in games hasn't really changed all that much. Unlike graphics and gameplay, which can benefit from general advancements in hardware and software technology, AI must largely be coded from scratch for each game. Some developers have had success in developing redeployable AI systems for their games, such as Bethesda's Radiant AI for their Fallout and Elder Scrolls series, but these are restricted to particular game engines, and, in attempting to cover a wide range of scenarios and outcomes, often exhibit a large share of flaws and shortcomings through emergent behavior, sometimes to great comedic effect. Perhaps the most significant change in the implementation of appropriate levels of difficulty in games came from the transition from 2D to 3D. Many games achieve success by translating the constraints, obstacles, and AI from two-dimensional games into 3D, as seen in the Super Mario series. Between Super Mario World and Super Mario 64, Mario has a limited supply of lives. He can get power-ups from smashing blocks, and Goombas cross Mario's path. However, the translation to 3D results in a number of new parameters that can present a challenge to the player through both necessities of the format and by design. Mario can survive a couple hits with a newly implemented health bar. He can jump around blocks in a number of ways, both intentional and emergent through the implemented Z-axis. And Goombas will turn, be alerted, and wander around aimlessly thanks to a more robust AI, needed to navigate 3 dimensions. To say nothing of the challenge of making player movement feel both natural and intuitive, a 3D action game presents many more variables to the balance between difficulty and player input. It wouldn't be particularly difficult to argue that the Super Mario series has been very successful at balancing player control and game difficulty to make very compelling games. In most of the series games, simply moving Mario around the screen just feels right, and the game's levels satisfyingly ramp up the difficulty as they progress. Yet, when a series' more recent entries presumptuously provides the player with a power-up granting invincibility, it's not easy to hold up as a pillar of difficulty done right. Enter the Souls series. The first Dark Souls made a number of improvements to gameplay over developer From Software's prior releases. Against tightly balanced player controls, Dark Souls delivers its significant difficulty through resource constraints, namely limited health potions and losable currency, through the obstacles of a large and seamless world that demands long and dangerous treks between the bonfires that provide refuge, and lastly through a rudimentary yet highly effective artificial intelligence. In its simplicity, coupled with superbly executed enemy animation cycles, it allows the game at large to be something greater than the sum of its parts. Learning enemy attack patterns is essential to the player's success in Dark Souls, and initially there is a steep learning curve to recognizing the movesets of an enemy. Once this is recognized by the player, enemies become markedly easier to defeat in future and repeat encounters. Coupled with the noted resource constraints and level design, the result is a compelling sense of fairness. Deaths that the player endures are often perceived as fair, because they are most often a result of either a first encounter with an enemy or human error. There are proportionally very few cheap death scenarios in the game in which the AI acts outside of established conventions. Interestingly, the changes that developer From Software made to sequel Dark Souls II further supports the idea that Dark Souls I struck a rare balance between input and difficulty to achieve its compelling nature. In response to predominant player strategies in Dark Souls, gameplay was rebalanced in an attempt to discourage some of the more exploitative playstyles, shifting away from the established framework of 1v1 and 2v1 encounters. Dark Souls 2 often stuck the player in combat situations involving 4 or more enemies, attacking at once. The new combat system also allowed for the AI's attacks to follow and redirect mid-animation, voiding the common strafe around and backstab strategy altogether. On the input side of the equation, the player hitbox was altered to be much more unwieldy than the previous entry, resulting in a disconnect between AI attacks visibly dodged and those actually registering as avoided. In an attempt to define difficulty done right, insofar as it pertains to action-based games, the first Dark Souls stands as a strong example of a game that compels the player primarily through its substantial difficulty, because the risks and rewards are fair. Like timeless old-school platformers and the best of today's indie roguelikes, Dark Souls' comparative lack of handholding is so enjoyable because it achieves a harmonious balance between tight player control and difficulty. While impossible to quantify outside the context of the game itself, recognizing the delicate balance achieved here helps us to understand what makes challenging gameplay experiences more fun than frustration.